Hi friends, we have Annie Zaidi here at the Cambridge University Press's Delhi office today. Annie she's a Mumbai-based author, freelance writer, and she is the winner of the 2019 Nine Dots Prize, which means that her very interesting entry titled Bread Cement Cactus won the Nine Dots Prize, which is a very prestigious book prize that encourages innovative thinking on issues that impact our everyday life around the world. So Annie's entry was intriguing in various ways, not just the title, also the way she looks at it, the way she tries to build the discourse around it, and she responds to a very important question: what is the idea of home to us? It's relevant. It's relevant than ever before. The idea of belonging, the idea of our roots, the idea that we are able to trace our roots and we believe in them. And this essay is now being expanded and it's been created into a book length work, which is going to be published by Cambridge University Press by May of this year. Welcome, Annie.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you very much. Before we get into a very intense discussion about the book, I'm sure the viewers would be interested to know what inspired you to participate in the Nine Dots Prize.
I think I really just participated because I submit as much as possible. I am a freelance writer and always struggling and scrounging and trying to make ends meet. It's very difficult as a freelance writer, as all writers and artists know. So I used to look out for opportunities, and I think one reason I like prizes is also that even if you don't get them, there is a deadline attached, so you end up creating something new. My work has often taken new direction and new shape in the course of prizes. Like I started writing plays, for instance, because the Hindu instituted a new prize for playwrights. Sometimes you see a competition for a poem and it encourages you to write to meet that deadline, and then you don't get the prize, it doesn't matter, but your mind has started working in a certain direction. So I have for a long time questions of belonging, roots, geography, microgeography, attachment to the land. These are things that I've been thinking about for a long time. And when I heard about the Nine Dots Prize, there's another journalist friend of mine who sent me the link, and I think she sent me the link partly because the topic was such that is there still no place like home, was something that I was already indirectly addressing in shorter columns and things. And it was just up my street. It was exactly what I wanted to write in any case. So even if I hadn't got the prize, maybe I wouldn't have written a whole book, but I certainly would have written a few long essays about the subject. So that became a trigger, and it was just the requirements of the prize also forced me to think, because it wasn't just an essay, it was a book proposal. When you have to work up to a proposal, you have to think of structure, you have to think about not just one single topic, but about how ideas link to each other. For me, I found that rigor and that the discipline of actually doing that very, very useful. I think I would have put the book together, maybe not in this form and shape, but with or without the prize, I would have written the book.
Okay, that's great to know. And what's the kind of support that Cambridge Crash Center provided you?
Cambridge has been very supportive, both the University Press and the Crash Center. Part of winning the prize is that they allow you an opportunity to come to Cambridge, which, because I'm not an academic, I have never been to a university like Cambridge before. One of the wonderful things that happens is that the libraries open up to you, not just the Crash Library, but libraries all over campus. They give you a library card, and for a reader and writer, it is the most exquisite thing to happen. Just seeing libraries that stock so much material, quite apart from the requirements of this book, because it is a short book. But any subject that you want to work seriously on, there is material, and you can request material even if they don't have it now, they'll actually work to get it for you.
Yeah.
So for me, that was so refreshing and so uplifting, really, for somebody who takes knowledge and the creation of books seriously. That was a real joy.
Yeah.
And conversations, I offered a couple of talks and seminars and participated in some. And the discipline of doing that was also quite, I found that quite exciting, actually.
Yeah, libraries, importantly, I think they just fuel your imagination, and like a famous Argentine author had said that he imagines that paradise will be a kind of library.
I totally think that my paradise will need a library, many libraries.
Yeah. That's true. So Annie, now sort of bringing the focus back on the book, I felt, and like I said at the beginning, that the title of the book is very intriguing. Bread, Cement and Cactus. If we have to dissociate ourselves from the history, the reasons that went into the making of the book, the award, what do you expect a reader to infer when she looks at the title for the first time?
Well, the title was really just a whim. I think I was trying to think about what is my book really about. And when I wrote the essay, as I've written in the book, the first few years of my life, my formative years really, not the first few years, the formative years of my life was spent near a cement factory, in a township that was around a cement factory. So that is how I came up with the title. But also I think Bread Cement Cactus, because I think all those three words also have resonance beyond their actual and immediate meaning in the book. Bread is integral to, it's your rosy roti, and most of us travel for work, a few of us have the luxury of traveling for pleasure. But when we migrate or when we move places, a lot of it has to do with work, which has to do with livelihood and bread. It is central to where you live. The question of bread is central to where you live. Cement, because houses are made of cement, and now they're made of concrete. Of course, they can be made of many materials, but the actual physical structure of where you live is linked to cement. And cactus, because I was referring to the actual cactus, but I think also because I find cactus is an interesting metaphor. It is a plant of survival under difficult conditions, and it is prickly, and it is not obviously beautiful in the sense that its flowers are you don't really see any flowers, but the thorns that are integral to the cactus are important to the cactus. It is a survival tactic. So I was playing with those words, and I think I want the reader also to understand that survival is at the heart of home. Your questions about roots, belonging, attachment, all of them are finally rooted in questions of survival.
Yeah. You made a very beautiful point here when you talk about rosy, roti, and the kind of concepts that you're playing with. When I was going through the draft of the manuscript, I also learnt that these are very everyday things. You make you talk about zameen, watan, you talk about mool nivasis, these people, those people. So these are very beautiful concepts, often ignored. They are at times in contrast with each other. They can often be used interchangeably as well. So it will be really interesting to know more about where did this come from. Is it that when you look at life, and when you look at life, you really look at these basics to break it down further and build a larger meaning of belonging around it?
So when I was growing up, I understood Vatan to mean country, Desh. That was my understanding of it. When I moved to Mumbai, I started to come up Delhi and Mumbai. I started to meet migrant workers, people who were in the services industries, and a lot of people, if you went looking for them, you would be told कि वो नहीं है, वो वतन गया है, and I would be like, वतन किधर गया है, उसका वतन तो यही है, you know. But I think in our North India particularly, when you use the word वतन या मुल्क गया है, or sometimes they would say मुलुक गया है, तो वो उसका मुल्क उसका गांव है ना.
That's true.
So for me then that was a revelation that if you just examine the way words are used, I think there's an entire history embedded in each word, in the use of each word, and the multiple ways in which a single word can be used. I began to understand that Vatan or Mulk is the thing that you feel you are rooted in, not where you live necessarily. Firstly that. And secondly, it is very specific to people. A person who's come to Delhi from somewhere else theoretically understands that he is still in his own nation. But the emotional heat that his village gives him, the point where he draws his inner sustenance from, and that I don't think, at least the first generation migrant may not feel in a new location. So for me that was a revelation, and that also forced me to think about that, but then where is my mulk, you know, where is my inner location? And the quest for it kind of also made me think harder about these questions.
Because you know, as I did ask you about concepts, but there's another very underlining tone in the manuscript. I mean, other than your unique experience of trying to understand where home is, this book can also be potentially termed as a reading in contemporary India and in the making of modern India as we see it, because you talk about exactly those moments, the movements, the processes that have defined us as people, us as a country. You talk about partition, then of course you talk about the making of Pakistan, you talk about land reforms, tribals, Adivasis and their identity and movement, some of the newer things that we are facing right now, the tussle between cosmopolitanism, nativism, vegetarianism. So what made you believe that this question about home is so potent that you will be able to draw out the character and the vivid sketch of 20th and 21st century India through it?
I didn't think I could. I didn't set out to do that.
Okay.
I set out to write a memoir. This is how I pitched it, and I didn't claim to be speaking for everyone. I claimed to be speaking only for myself. It just so happens that we are at this particular point in our history where we have not moved far enough from the creation of modern India as a nation state. We're still working our way through all those processes, politically, economically, socially, all of, spiritually even, I think. And I think I'm caught in the middle, and one of the reasons I'm caught in the middle is my particular and peculiar circumstances. The fact that I come from a mixed marriage, the fact that I happen to be a journalist and have access to some of the struggles that I don't just watch but have reported on, written about. And through the process of writing about something, you become an unwitting participant also in that conversation. And I think that I didn't set out to necessarily participate. It was just often I was reluctantly made to participate. Like for instance, the question of identity, religious identity in particular, caste identity. I didn't go looking to chase those stories or to enter that conversation from an academic point of view. It was just that everywhere I traveled, it was just so in your face. People just ask you everywhere, ki jaat kya hai tumhari? For me, growing up, I was actually shielded from such information, actively shielded. Like, it was not seen as a polite thing to do. And but once you leave the shelter of your immediate family, moment you enter your caste, your religion, your sect, ki acha to aap क्या है? And I remember this conversation when I've written about it in another book. I used to get angry at that question when I was younger, that तुम्हें क्या फर्क क्या पड़ता है मैं क्या हूँ? I was traveling for work and I was in a train, a railway station. I was in a waiting room of a railway station, and a woman got talking to me, another young woman, and she asked me, "तो आप क्या हैं?" And usually I would make some polite something, but that day मेरा mood बहुत खराब था, so I just said मैं कुछ नहीं हूँ, and she was very offended at my lack of response. I expected her to be apologetic. She was offended. She said, "What do you mean? Everybody is something. How can you not be anything?" And I said, "No, I'm actually nothing." So she said, "आपके मम्मी पापा क्या हैं?" मैंने कहा मेरे मम्मी पापा क्या थे उन्होंने मुझे बताया नहीं. तो she started to say कि ऐसा कैसे हो सकता है? And I resisted telling her in those 5 minutes, but somehow this conversation was imprinted in my mind. It wasn't that it mattered much to her. I could have just told her the truth, right? And told her a nuanced truth, and she would have accepted it. I don't think she would have rejected that truth. But it mattered to her to find out, and it mattered to me that she wanted to know. And I think some of these things kind of really also forced me to examine this idea of actually, so then who am I? And is it just a label somebody stuck on me, or do I feel like something? What is my inner spiritual location? What do I identify with? These were all questions that have been brewing in my mind for 15 years. And I think whether I like it or not, they're there around me.
Yeah. That's true, and I think these questions have become more vocal, they're more visible, and I mean, while in the past there would be, very few occasions when people would talk about or they would ask about where you belong to, what's your religion, what's your sect, like you rightly said, but now these are more mainstream conversations, and they try to also judge you from, they look at your physical appearance, their clothes, and they try to understand where do you come from,
which box to put you in.
That box, that difficult box that all of us are struggling with. So now that we're talking about, we're talking about the contemporary climate, what's happening in the country right now. What do you think, how vulnerable does the idea of home becomes when the country or the state turns a stranger on you?
Very vulnerable, very vulnerable. I think basically, we would like to think that home is non-negotiable, but the truth is that we are constantly negotiating home every day. And there are many things I wanted to bring into the book, but I haven't because it's a short book, as you know, and I couldn't cram everything in, and I was trying to cram everything into the last chapter. And then I was advised not to, because that's not how books work. But for instance, the idea of safety and vulnerability in the home begins with your first home, which is your own home. As a child, children are extremely vulnerable, not because, most people take care of their children, or they try to at least, but children are vulnerable because they're dependent and because they don't have a choice. They don't have the choice to leave the home. Then, if they did leave, they would be vulnerable then to outsiders outside the home. And similarly, I think when we say things like Bharat Mata, or when we say that the mother nation or the fatherland or the motherland, partly we say it because the relationship of the citizen or the resident to the land is actually that of sort of similar to that of a kind of parental figure, because the land doesn't, it's not just that you owe allegiance to the land, but the land is meant to take care of you. Not just in the literal sense of, feeding you, like growing food for you, etc. But it is responsible for you. It is not just that you are supposed to maintain law and order, etc., and to follow rules. but that you do it on the condition and the implicit understanding that this is, you take for granted, the law doesn't need to spell it out, that your country needs to take care of you. Just as when a child is sick, or when a child is needy, or even if a child is not quite a child, you know, that just as in a family it is understood that even if you're not capable of taking care of yourself, you will be taken care of. Similarly, that is our relationship to the state. The state is meant to take care of us. And that is where we come up with these labels, welfare state, etc. I mean, whether you have the label or not, the state has that responsibility. You can say that you don't have that responsibility, but it does, the state does. The state draws its legitimacy from its responsibilities to the citizens.
The citizens, yeah. Yeah, that's a very important point, and that brings me to this question that, you know, right now we are in the vicinity of 24 hours protest, which is going to complete its 60 days. I guess it's completed today. The Shaheen Bagh protest, I think this is going to be registered in history as a major awakening amongst Muslims, Indian Muslims in particular. You know, all of us, and I relate to several portions in the book where you talk about, you know, our fear, or maybe our ignorance, or our lack of interest in identifying ourselves as more Muslims. You know, the uncomfortable imagination of a Muslim. But now when I very closely observe the Shaheen Bagh protest, I see these women who are very ordinary women. Most of them, you know, the dadis of Shaheen Bagh may not even have had formal school education. So these are women who have held the constitution, the book, close to their hearts. They're holding the right kind of symbols. They have Ambedkar, they've set up a Phule library. So these are very interesting times, and they come across as unapologetic Muslims. Do you really see this as an awakening of Muslims who are proud to say that they're Indians, Indian Muslims?
Yeah, I think this is an evolving situation, so I'm also just watching, and I find it difficult to draw any obvious conclusion from it. I think one thing I'm a little wary of, this is something I was having an online conversation kind of engagement this morning, in fact, where somebody talked about, commented on that this is the first time in 100 years that people have been this assertive and kind of, you know, the Indian Muslims have been this assertive in their public role, something like that. And that this is more important than any of the reform movements. And I'm a little skeptical of making that kind of statement, partly because I think everything builds on something else. You know, nothing comes from nothing.
Yeah.
So I think that we have come to this point from both positive and negative ways. One thing is that the apologetic tone is gone. I think what had happened post-partition was that, one, the whole everything associated with Muslim culture was starting to be viewed with suspicion, and that suspicion was ratcheted up, often deliberately, over successive decades. Like with every decade, I think 60s onwards, late 60s onwards, every few years, either there would be a riot or there would be something else, and it's gotten worse. The rhetoric got worse and worse and worse. Yeah. But when it came to questions of citizenship and belonging, there really was like, you had your backs to the wall. So I think a lot of people just dropped the apologetic tone completely. And I think that was a good thing. That is a major step forward. Because I think also globally there has been Islamophobia. There's been a lot of this whole thing of terrorism and the selective ways of defining terrorism. Okay, terrorist kaun hota hai? Terrorist क्या सिर्फ एक ही उससे आता है? So those kind of questions were something that people had in their heads but were afraid to push into the public discourse, and now that fear is gone. So I think that is one very big step forward. But we must also remember that this fearlessness comes from actual loss. It is not, the movement is not buoyed by something good, it is buoyed by something negative. That people have had to come up. They would have preferred not to come up, to be honest. You know? So I think if people were allowed to just live in peace, there would be no movement. We must remember that the dadis are out because the dadis are worried.
The dadis are worried, for their future,
for the future,
the children's future.
The children's future more than their own future. And I think we must also remember that all of this has been built on the backs of earlier movements. The freedom movement, definitely. We are using the symbols, the songs, things directly from the freedom movement. So it's almost like there was this lull in our ideas about citizenship for a long time. The word citizenship had fallen out of public discourse, right? We were talking about religion, we were talking about caste, we were talking about elections, but we were not talking about citizenship and rights, citizens' rights. There's a lecture I attended recently on Constitution, 70 years of the Constitution, and a prominent lawyer, Sanjay Hegde, he delivered the lecture, and one of the things that really struck me in his lecture was he said, citizenship is the right to have rights. What had started to happen was that you were talking about rights, right to food, right to information, right to whatever, and you were talking about elections. But now we have come to a point where we have to discuss who has the right to have those rights. It's not that people are wholesale taking away all rights. It's that now we have come to a point where we are actually discriminating between who has rights and who doesn't. And that we had taken for granted all this time, and now we can't.
So citizenship is essentially the foundation of the discourse of rights.
And that is having to be reclaimed now. And so obviously, therefore we go back to the freedom movement, and therefore we go back to the word freedom. Because if you do not have the right to have rights, what do you have? Because
the moment you are not a citizen, it means you are disenfranchised.
And when we use words like citizen, disenfranchisement, मतलब वो खोखला शब्द नहीं है. Disenfranchisement actually means the taking away of everything. It doesn't just mean that you can't vote. People tend to think like that you can't vote, but hidden within that is that if you can't vote, then you're not a full citizen, then you're not a full resident, then the state doesn't owe you anything. And then the state can do what it likes with you. And where do you go? Because no one else is offering you citizenship either.
So where do you belong?
Come
back to the central question.
Come back to the central question. And I think also it is very dangerous because once you set out a precedent that one person can be disenfranchised for any reason, then everybody else can also be disenfranchised for similar reasons, or a certain political atmosphere can be created where you can start to treat other groups badly also. So it's a horrible precedent, and one has to fight it.
Absolutely. And at times you also feel that it is also very frivolous because, for the kind of things that we've read about in Assam, people's, their spellings of their names were wrong. So essentially everything is dependent on the government clerical documentation. So it's someone else
makes the mistake, you pay
and
the price.
You pay for it. And someone else who's going to essentially define whether or not I belong to this place.
Well, also this whole question of linking religion with citizenship. Professor Neera Chendo was also at a talk, and she pointed out something interesting, that when the British started their censuses in India towards the end of the 19th century, from the start in India, they always included religious data in the censuses. So when somebody comes as an enumerator, you define yourself, identify yourself as, X caste, X religion, etc. And the state enumerates you as such also. In Britain, they didn't. In Britain, it was optional whether or not you wanted to identify yourself. So I think this is something, we tend to have this self-image of ourselves as this is how we identify ourselves as Indians or as South Asians. But I don't think it's that simple. It is how we were seen from the outside, and we were taught to see ourselves, and we haven't stopped learning to see ourselves in this fashion. And I think that the political narrative discourse also comes out of that experience, is my view. I don't know whether I do not have sufficient data to back up this view, but I do feel that ideologically speaking, to self-identify, mix up our view of ourselves as citizens, which is partly what the census does, right? It measures not the quality of citizenship, just the fact that you reside somewhere and X person lives in X place, and link that with religion. That in the political framework, this is something that we didn't choose to do as organically as residents of the Indian subcontinent. This was something we were taught to do fairly recently in our history, but now we do. So then how does one pull back, and how does one shift the terms of that conversation?
And how do we as individuals try to take control of it when the state makes faith as a marker for your citizenship?
It's not worked anywhere really in the world, I think. People keep looking towards the developed world, the so-called developed world, however you define it, when states do well. If you look at history, states have historically always done well when they move away from narrow identity concerns.
Yeah, that's true.
So I really don't see that how these two things.
Things that are happening in India, I mean, of course, we feel them at a more local level, so we're more conscious about them. We keep talking about them, but largely world over, I mean, countries are becoming more inward looking, and you mentioned about your early days in Bombay when it was, the Me Mumbaiker and, the Bhaiyas under attack and all of that. So now we see it at a larger level. It's just got mixed up. It's beyond regions, beyond regional affiliations, beyond statehood. It's now about religion as such. So that's a...
Yeah, I think, what happens is that in the political framework, people are kind of mixed up, and people know that they're kind of mixed up. But every time there is somebody on the political fringes who wants to come into the mainstream and wants to take charge of the political narrative, that person needs to create either a vision to aspire towards, or needs to create an other against which people can be kind of, the majority can be kind of cobbled together in some fashion. And this we see in cycle after cycle after cycle. So at this point in Mumbai, the north-south divide is not the political conversation, partly because now there is a kind of critical mass of North Indians there. Earlier it was South Indians, now it's North Indians. So that conversation is no longer politically useful. It's also a tired argument. You've seen it over 20 years, so there's 4 election cycles. It's like in Hindi we have that term, Red Peetna. So, kab tak red peetenge uski? So these people get over it, right? And people have gotten over it now. So now you need to create a new other, or you need to pull back something which you thought was a faded argument from 20 years back and bring it back into the political thing. I think periodically people keep trying to do this. And it is very useful when there is no vision. Right? When there is no alternative vision, and when people are already distressed, it's very easy to turn them towards something that they can militate against.
When we were speaking about the Shaheen Bagh protest, you mentioned about the freedom movement, and I see that in one of the chapters you do sort of raise a question. You go back to partition and you say that whether the partition happened in 1947 or was it just initiated, because we've seen several ways in which we've attacked each other. People have been attacked, they've been killed, there've been genocides. The Sikh riots, Gujarat, Bombay. So, and you also, make an elaborate discussion about what is it that as a country and as a community we could do to come to terms with the idea of partition, or haven't we spoken enough about partition that we continue to see such really painful episodes in our history?
Actually, I think part of the reason is that we haven't spoken enough about partition. As I write in my book, that I think we haven't had closure in terms of neither India nor Pakistan. We haven't had closure because partition should have been the culmination, right? But actually, if we see that the partition rhetoric is ratcheted up only about 2 decades before, and the majority of people did not actually buy into that argument that they wanted a separate identity. Really, they continued to think of themselves as both separate and one, and I think somewhere deep down we all recognize that even now, which is why while we talk of all this, there is also this talk of Akhand Bharat. एक तरफ से तो constantly कि Pakistan, Pakistan. On the other hand, in your vision, political vision, and sort of for people who often have the most problems with Pakistan, they also think of Pakistan as being part of India, territorially and spiritually. So I think that this is a kind of it's a little bit schizophrenic, but it's also a little bit, I think, pointing towards the truth. That this is the truth actually, that South Asia, what we think of as South Asia, is there is a unity underlying us. It's genetic, it's racial, it's cultural even, and we recognize that, and we want somewhere to hold on to that. We don't want to completely let go of the idea that कभी एक थे और शायद कहीं ना कहीं अभी भी एक है. So I think that वो partition पूरी तरह तो कभी नहीं हो पाएगा, as long as and this is also why ये जो ज़बान का मसला है, ये सारी चीज़ें जो है ना, that trying to visas through language, you're trying to force people apart that actually people do not fundamentally feel apart. You're artificially creating constraint after constraint after constraint to force people to feel different. And which is why I feel that this is all the unfinished business of partition. And every time people try to kind of separate themselves, with every contact that they have with the other, they also find that it is impossible to separate yourself. Which is I think people who root their politics in division rather than unity struggle against this, because they understand that it's really difficult.
Yes, you're right. So while there is a very dedicated attempt to sort of separate you mentally, of course physically, but there is also this huge brigade that will always throw the question at Indian Muslims that why don't you go to Pakistan? So most of us, my generation, the people that I talk to regularly, they've always considered Pakistan as a dark geographic shadow that's chasing them, and the fact that they had to separate themselves, dealienate themselves was significant, so that you could get accepted by the majority here. And there is very less discussion about this very important fact that there were families, there were clans who were able to resist majoritarianism then. So it's like a regular thing that's thrown at you. Okay, you like the cricket team, go to Pakistan. You disagree with a particular ideology, you go to Pakistan. You don't like a film, go to Pakistan. So in such a situation in the prevalent times, it's almost difficult to really separate us mentally also.
It's interesting. Nobody says go to Dubai because I think Pakistan has a unique place in the Indian imagination, because not only because it is the other, not only because border, nobody says go to China, for instance. Pakistan is the thing that you see as the thing that was taken away, but also as a place where you cannot go. So for a lot of Indians, particularly those of the right wing, they see Pakistan as a no-go zone, as a place where they are not welcome themselves, and they assume that all Indian Muslims are welcome there by default. So this is the tricky thing, that it's not just, it is it represents loss more than anything else. I mean, I think more than hate, it represents loss. And until we come to terms with that, the feelings of loss, I don't think we'll be able to change the kind of very nasty political discourse.
That's true. You made these wonderful. You will provide, when readers pick up your book, they will see that there are moments, and then there are moments in our life which we have often ignored, or maybe we are conditioned in a particular way that we don't think that they're important. But you've looked very wittingly, you've looked at those aspects and to define if they're home. One of the most hard hitting was when you talk about graves as homes. So I'm sure the readers will benefit, and it's hitting, it's telling you in many ways, and these are things that you never considered, and they're there. So just tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, it sounds morbid when you. I don't like to talk about it even with my own friends, because वो सोचेंगे कि she's not thinking right or something like that. I have always felt very at peace in graveyards. I have not found the idea of the grave as a distressing idea. Yeah. I think of it as a resting place. And the thing is that why I wrote the chapter is that I started to think of home when we say that question, when we say there's no place like home. Why do we say that? Why is there no place like home? Because it's a place where we feel welcomed, where we have a right to be, and where we are at rest. अपने घर में कुछ भी कर सकते हो, right? Nobody challenges you in your own home कि आप ये नहीं कर सकते, वो नहीं कर सकते. बहुत बंदिश होती है that home stops feeling like home, right?
Yeah.
So I think of it as a place of rest. You go there to sleep, right? Home, even if you don't have a very good home, at the very least it's a place to go to sleep. जिनके पास कुछ नहीं होता, झोपड़ी भी होती है. At least it's, it's a roof, it's four walls, it's something. It's a resting place. And then the grave is also a resting place. It's the final resting place. So which is why I made the connection between the two. And in Sufi thought, of course, you not only is it a grave, a final resting place, our ideas of home is also that home is elsewhere. ये दुनिया जो है, ये अपनी नहीं है. And the next world is where you really belong. So I was playing with all of these ideas, and personally also, I think that ultimately यहाँ तो रहना नहीं, ultimately तो कहीं और ही जाना है. I don't know कहाँ जाना है, but so yeah, I mean, if you're lucky and anything at all of you remains, then some memory will remain, and maybe a grave will remain. I like the idea of memory. I really like the idea of tangible memory. I collect souvenirs. I collect. So for somebody of my temperament and my belief system, I think the idea of a grave, an epitaph, something which of something remaining by way of tangible memory is an appealing idea.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you've developed a fascination for this from your grandmother, your maternal grandmother.
Yeah, I don't think she was fascinated. I think she just took it for granted. Like she actually, I used to think it was very morbid when I was little. She actually said कि ना हमने अपना खुद का कफन खरीद लिया है. हाँ, तो मुझे लगता था कि क्या कफन की बातें कर रही हैं. But now that I'm older, I also think that हाँ अच्छा किया.
Yeah, why depend on someone? Yeah, and why owe someone something towards the end of this journey?
I think also that when the older you get, I mean, some people are afraid of death.
True.
But I think she wasn't. At least what I knew of her, she was in no hurry to die. But I think that she was a very fearless woman, and I think I would like to be like that. I don't think I am as brave as she was, but I would like to be like that.
Annie, how much of you, being a woman has impacted your understanding in questions about home or the lack of it?
Completely.
Yeah.
I think this is completely fundamental. In fact, when I started writing this book and when people heard about the prize and I tried to explain to them कि मैं क्या कर रही हूँ, etc. I talked to a few women and we would talk, and then at some point, more than 2 or 3 times this happened, that those women would say, but as a woman, what does home mean? Many women said this, that what does home even mean as a woman? That got me thinking. As women, our claims on home are historically and in contemporary times smaller. Not only in terms of property of course, that you don't always have the right to property, but also there is the question of being dislodged. Men can take for granted even now that पुश्तैनी घर में रहेंगे, so your बाप दादा का whatever it is. You don't have to be dislodged unless if you happen to need the work you might leave and you might come back, but that is a choice you can make. For women, we've not usually had that choice. Even if in my own home, actually, some girls have been lucky that in the ancestral house you would marry a cousin. So isangan se usangan mein, right? But most people actually don't have that option. 99% of India does not have that option.
Certainly, and also most of us, girls, we were conditioned and trained in a way that आपको दूसरे के घर के लिए तैयार होना है.
Yes, absolutely. Even I have a very liberal mother and more liberal than me in many ways. And when she read the book, she was like, I never told you that. And I was like, no, Ma, you did. But this is true. You are, just in casual conversation, you will be told that, clean your room not because the room has to be cleaned, because if you are not a neat person, what will your in-laws say? And slowly these things kind of, while you're growing up, this filters into your consciousness that be prepared to move. And be prepared to leave what you think of as your home now. And I don't think men are taught, I mean, they're taught to be clean for different reasons, but they're not given that sense of that this is not your home.
There is a sense of permanence attached to their idea of home.
And a sense of entitlement. And that is where the entitlement comes from, actually. The fact that you're never going to be kicked out. And for girls, you may be, no matter how loved you are, they can lavish you with love. But somewhere, I think most definitely, I would say 99% of Indian South Asian girls, not just Indian. There is this feeling that I am loved, but
that's the longevity of this. You speak about your mother. I've not had a chance to look at it, but I've been told that she's working on some illustrations that will be part of the book. So what are they? Are they as intriguing everyday objects as you talk about books and in the book, characters, places?
Sort of, yeah. She read the manuscript and then she did the illustrations. So each chapter has its own illustration. She's taken elements, both metaphorical elements and physical objects and locations, and she's kind of drawn a composite picture of each chapter, referencing the things that I've talked about. She's a very good artist. She unfortunately does not pursue it professionally. She gave up for many years, but she's a good artist and she has a very fine eye, which I don't have, unfortunately. I haven't inherited that from her. And because I write so much about her also in the book, and a lot of my identity comes from her side of the family. So I thought it would be nice for her too.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to just add more beauty to the already wonderful writing that's there.
I'm sure it will.
At the end, have you been, in the course of writing this book and in your life journey, have you been able to, identify a home for yourself? Because during the introduction I said that she's a Mumbai-based freelance writer and author. But is that really your introduction? Is Mumbai home?
I vote there. So yes, if you link it to franchise, then I suppose it is a kind of home. It's where I've lived longest now. I grew up in Rajasthan, like I said, but now I have lived longer in Mumbai than I have anywhere else.
Okay.
And I am, despite my little problems with the city, it's also where it's easiest for many reasons. It's as a woman, as a, it's cosmopolitanism. It's I'm most comfortable with it, and I think. But then I think also that I really don't have the answer to that question now more than ever. Partly because, like we started talking about citizenship and things, that you can only be at home where there is a sense of security and welcome. So I am at home to the extent where there is security and welcome and bread, rozi roti. So as long as that is there, yes. But I also think that when political situations become very fluid, your ideas of home change very quickly. Like, I have at any rate been, knocking about and thinking about this question for a long time. I know people who've just born and brought up in one city all their lives.
Yeah, that's true.
But when politics changes, then suddenly your home doesn't remain the same, your city doesn't remain the same, your mahalla doesn't. Overnight, these things can change.
Yeah, people, neighbors.
Also climate change. Some people in Bombay are now saying that if we don't stop climate change, we have 10 years. It's an island city, right? Very, not only is it close to the shore, it is effectively all shore. Like 90% of Bombay is just, the sea is hardly a kilometer or something. People live there. Houses are built there, offices are built there. A 2-meter rise in sea levels will mean Bombay will be unrecognizable if something like that happens, right? So we have to also consider all these things, that climate can really make Rajasthan, for instance. This is something I wanted to bring into the book, but I didn't have the space or time for it. I grew up in Rajasthan. I remember that in summers, the soil temperature would sometimes touch 50. So 48, 49 degrees, I could deal with it. Now, I can't deal with it because, one, I'm not acclimatized to it. In Bombay, the heat is not that intense. But also that scientists will say that there is physically point beyond which the human body cannot cope with the heat, and this is linked to humidity. You can still survive if the temperature is hot but the climate is dry. If it's hot and the climate is humid, you stop functioning, right? So if the temperature rises 2 degrees in Bombay and the humidity is 80 or 90 or 100% or 200%, I don't know what it will be. The question of everything else, all these other things we're talking about, politics, identity, roots, all these questions become meaningless.
Absolutely. And you realize the survival is at risk. So yeah. Wonderful, Annie. Very nice talking to you. And I really hope that the book does well for a variety of reasons. And our viewers are able to enjoy reading this book as much as I have enjoyed, as much as Annie has enjoyed writing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.